some caffeine and calories as we reconvene. We'll start with Katell Berthelot, who will give us a paper on the paradoxical similarity of the Roman heaven.
Thank you very much. I want first to thank Michal and Walter and Matthew for organizing this conference and for inviting me. It's my first time at Ben-Gurion University, and I'm very happy to be here. And as Michal said yesterday, the paper I'm going to present today is part of a bigger project that benefits from a grant from the European Research Council. And the bigger project is about the impact of Roman imperialism on the formation of ancient Judaism. And one of my hypotheses that I'm working with is that Rome represented a special challenge for Israel. And so in this lecture, I shall attempt to answer a question that is both simple and intricate. In which ways was the Roman other perceived as a different other than, let's say, previous enemies of Israel, known from the Bible and from the Second Temple period, such as the Philistines, the Edomites, the Babylonians, or the Greeks? And in particular, what made the Roman Empire different from other empires which had subjugated Israel? In order to answer this question, I shall focus on the rabbinic evidence from the land of Israel and start with a few remarks concerning the well-known identification of Rome with Ezo or Edom, before looking at the wider historical context in which the violent interactions between the Romans and the Jews took place during the 1st century CE. So first point, Edom, Christian Rome or pagan Rome. The identification of Rome with Ezo, Jacob's twin brother, found repeatedly in rabbinic literature, is based on a paradoxical choice. If one was looking for a biblical character or a people representing the arch enemy of Israel, why not choose to identify Rome with Babylon, another city representing an empire who had destroyed Israel's temple? Why not choose to identify Rome with Amalek, who, by the way, was described as one of the descendants of Ezo? The rabbis, however, mainly chose to identify Rome with Ezo himself, Israel's brother. For sure, as Karol Bakos correctly emphasizes, the reference to Ezo in rabbinic literature serves different purposes. Ezo may, in some cases, represent an ultimate other with no particular historical background, so that not all occurrences of Ezo or Edom are to be read in connection with Rome. Many, however, can be shown to be closely linked to Rome. The identification of Rome with Ezo Edom has been explained in reference to King Herod, whose ancestors were Idumeans and who was a client king of Rome. This explanation, however, is not really convincing, especially if one recalls Josephus' account in the Jewish War, according to which the Idumeans, who had been integrated to Judea by John Hyrcanus I, fought alongside the Judeans and against the Romans to protect the Jerusalem temple. Several scholars have proposed a different explanation based on the prophecies concerning Edom's doom, which are indeed numerous in the Bible. And Gerson Cohen has emphasized the particular relevance of the passages concerning the Edomites in the Lamentations of Jeremiah in connection with the destruction of the first temple, in order to understand the identification of Rome with Edom following the destruction of the second temple. Jacob Neusner has distinguished himself from previous theories by claiming that before the 4th century, Rome was just a place and an empire among others, which had no particular significance for the rabbis. According to him, the identification of Rome with Ezo was a late phenomenon closely linked to the Christianization of the empire, because, I quote, Christian Rome posed a threat without precedent. In rabbinic literature, Ezo or Edom thus refers to a Christian Rome and ultimately to Christianity itself, according to Neusner. But other scholars disagree with Neusner and claim that the identification of Rome with Ezo Edom happened well before the 4th century CE. Israel Yuval, for instance, dates it to the first half of the 2nd century CE. And Neusner's theory has also been challenged by Adiel Schremer, who in his book Brothers Estranged argues that, I quote, Constantine's conversion and the resulting Christianization of the Roman Empire were, from the rabbinic point of view, of relatively little significance. According to Schremer, the link between Edom and Rome is already found in Tannaitic literature. The main problem with the identification of Rome with Edom in rabbinic sources is methodological. The rabbis who actually identify Rome with Edom go back at least to the 3rd generation of Tannaim in the 2nd century CE. The earliest sources in which the sayings of these rabbis are mentioned, however, are sources dating from the 4th or the 5th century CE, namely the Jerusalem Talmud and Genesis Rabbah. Now, during the 4th and the 5th century CE, Rome progressively became Christian. Therefore, some scholars, like Neusner, disregard the identification of the rabbi to whom the saying is attributed and focus on the date of the last redaction of the work as a whole, argue that one should not interpret Edom or Ezo as referring to the Roman Empire during the 2nd or the 3rd century CE, but rather to the Christian Roman Empire. In this debate, I tend to side with those who want to balance Neusner's approach and who do take the attribution of a saying to a particular rabbi into consideration, acknowledging, of course, that this must be done critically. Moreover, some Tannaitic texts, and not merely Tannaitic figures, while admittedly more elusive than later sources, tend to corroborate the view that Rome was identified with Ezo or Edom, at least from the 1st century CE onward. In this regard, I would like to mention a passage from Sefer Deuteronomy, paragraph 343, which is the first text on your handout, which comments upon Deuteronomy 33:2. And he said, "The Lord came from Sinai and rose up from Seir unto them. He shined forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of saints. From his right hand went a fiery law for them." The Midrashic interpretation is as follows. And he said, "The Lord came from Sinai. When the Holy One, blessed be he, revealed himself to give the Torah to Israel, he did not reveal himself in one language only, but in 4 languages. And he said, the Lord came from Sinai, this is the Hebrew language. He rose up from Seir unto them, this is the Roman language, Latin. He shined forth from Mount Paran, this is the Arabic language. He came with 10,000 saints, this is the Aramaic language." The passage from Deuteronomy deals with the revelation of the Torah, described as a fiery law, at Sinai. Yet, strangely enough, alongside Sinai, the biblical verse mentions 2 other places, Seir and Paran. In the Bible, Mount Seir is consistently associated with Ezo and Edom, whereas Mount Paran is the territory of Ishmael, considered the ancestor of the Arabs. Hence the idea that the biblical verse alludes to the fact that God revealed the Torah in Arabic. Now, as far as Seir is concerned, in order for the association between Seir, Ezo, Edom on the one hand, and the Roman language on the other to work, to make sense, we must presuppose the identification of Edom with Rome. There is no other way the text can make sense. And since the final redaction of Sefer Deuteronomy is dated from the 1st century CE, we have here a clear example showing that the identification of the Roman Empire with Ezo or Edom predates the Christianization of the empire. Hence the question. If the identification of Rome with Ezo, Edom was not based on the rivalry between Jews and Christians, then what prompted Jews to identify the Roman Empire with Israel's twin brother? And I come to my second point, the similarity of the Roman other. Beyond Rome, there was a city and there was a people. In the perspective of many Romans, the city, the Urbs, was meant to grow and to coincide with the entire world, Orbs or Orbis. As Ovid said, and I think this is also in the handout, yes, the land of other nations has a fixed boundary, whereas the territory of Rome is identically that of the city and that of the world. Romanae spatium est urbis et orbis idem. Now, according to biblical and Jewish representations, the destiny of Israel was also closely associated with that of a city, Jerusalem. toward which all peoples were expected to converge and gather at the end of times. We talked about this morning, in order to bring their tribute to the God of Israel. In a Jewish perspective, it was Jerusalem that was the center of the earth, omphalos teskes, or tabur haaretz. Jerusalem was a temple city with a universal dimension and a universal vocation. Therefore, when the Jews were confronted with the Romans, they were to a great extent facing a rivalry of universalisms. Moreover, as I have said previously, beyond Rome, there were both a city and a people. An obvious but generally overlooked element of answer to the question, what prompted Jews to identify the Roman Empire with Israel's twin brother, lies in the fact that for Israel, the confrontation with Rome originally was a confrontation with another people, the populus Romanus. Now, Israel was confronted with several empires in antiquity, but the Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, and Macedonian empires were those of kings that did not belong to a people, nor was conquest performed in the name of a people. The fact that the Romans had no king struck the author of the first book of Maccabees, who described Roman imperialism and Roman victories against their enemies at length in 1 Maccabees 8, and concluded with these words, and this is also in your handout, and in all this, not even one of them, or one of the Romans, has put on a crown, nor have they wrapped themselves in purple so as to show their power by it. As early as the 2nd and the 1st century BCE, one finds numismatic representations of the genius populi Romani, the personification of the Roman people, that display him as a man seated on a cruel chair with a scepter and a globe, crowned by victory. There are thus very explicit representations of the Roman people's rule and domination over the world. Moreover, the genius populi Romani received a cult as early as the 3rd century BCE. Of course, the Roman rejection of a monarchy-like type of government ended with the Principate and the growing importance and sacrality of the emperor and of the imperial family during the centuries that followed. Still, the testimony of Augustus Res Gestae shows that the Roman people and the Senate remained very present in imperial discourse, and that the princeps presented his actions as subordinated to the will of the people and of the Senate. One of the inscriptions on which the text of the Res Gestae is preserved starts as follows, text number 4 in your handout. A copy is set out below of the achievements of the divine Augustus, by which he brought the world under the empire of the Roman people, and of the expenses which he bore for the state and people of Rome. The original is engraved on 2 bronze pillars set up at Rome. And in paragraph 26.1, Augustus writes, I extended the territory of all those provinces of the Roman people, on whose borders lay peoples not subject to our government. The close association between Augustus and the Roman people is apparent also when he states at 26.4 that the Cimbri, Caridas, Semnonis, and all the German peoples of that region sent ambassadors and sought my friendship and that of the Roman people. Even later on, as Clifford Ando rightly notes, and I quote from him, the notional sovereignty of the populus Romanus remained integral to imperial ideology and received expression in the continued holding of elections through the early 3rd century. The references to the Roman people in texts, inscriptions, or coins were not merely a rhetorical aspect of imperial discourse, but a truly ideological one. This ideology represented a challenge for Israel, a challenge that rested upon what could be perceived from a Jewish perspective as a rivalry of elections and vocations between Rome and Israel. To rephrase it in Gerson Cohen's words, I quote, each considered itself divinely chosen and destined for a unique history. Each was obsessed with its glorious antiquity. Each was convinced that heaven had selected it to rule the world. neither could accept with equanimity any challenge to its claims. First, both the Romans and the Jews had a clear sense of having a unique historical destiny that was the result of the will of the gods or of God. From the Principate onwards, Roman authors were particularly keen in emphasizing the Trojan origins of the Romans, which meant that the gods had planned Rome a very long time in advance. And as Moshe Weinfeld has emphasized, Aeneas' story shows similarities with Greek foundation stories, but there are also striking parallels between Virgil's epic and the biblical narrative, especially concerning Abraham. Both Aeneas and Abraham are called to leave their fatherland in order to receive a new land and give birth to a new people, which will ultimately prevail over all the others and rule over the world. Moreover, one of the main characteristics of both Aeneas and Abraham is their piety. Of course, Roman pietas, which meant that the Romans kept their obligations toward the gods and were scrupulous in their observance of the religious rites, was not the equivalent of the Hebrew chesed. However, Aeneas' exemplary pietas, which later on came to characterize the Roman people as a whole, may to some extent be compared to the exemplary piety or obedience of Abraham, which made him a worthy partner of God's covenant. Now, whereas a Greek writer like Polybius took note of the Romans' extraordinary piety, but did not see in this piety the decisive factor in their victories against the other nations, such a connection was firmly established by Roman authors. The Roman pietas was thought to be the source of the gods' support to the Romans. And Horace, for instance, makes the point very clear when he writes, "O Roman, it is because you hold yourselves inferior to the gods that you rule. For every beginning seek their approval. To them attribute its outcome." And Cicero, on the other hand, writes, and this is also in the handout, text 5, "Who, once convinced that divinity does exist, can fail at the same time to be convinced that it is by its power that this great empire has been created, extended, and sustained? However good be our conceit of ourselves, conscript fathers, we have excelled neither Spain in population, nor Gaul in vigor, nor Carthage in versatility, nor Greece in art, nor indeed Italy and Latium itself in the innate sensibility characteristic of this land and its peoples. But in piety, in devotion to religion, and in that special wisdom which consists in the recognition of the truth that the world is swayed and directed by divine disposal, we have excelled every race and every nation." According to Cicero, the Romans excelled not only in the respect of the duties toward the gods and the observance of the religious rites, but also in the understanding of providence designs. And from a Roman perspective, these designs clearly favored Rome, which had been granted a worldly dominion by the gods themselves. From a Jewish perspective, however, the repeated affirmation according to which the Romans excelled in piety and had been attributed a universal empire by divine providence was tantamount to a claim to compete with the election of Israel, who was the truly chosen people, chosen by the only true God. This rivalry of elections went hand in hand with a rivalry of vocations or missions. From the Principate onward, and even before, Rome was presented as a power that brought peace and order to the world. An order that was not, in the Romans' perspective, predicated on military force alone, but mainly on law. This was, for instance, the mission ascribed to the Romans in Virgil's Aeneid, according to the passage in which Anchises foretells to Aeneas the fate of the people to whom he will give birth. This is also in your handout. "Others, I doubt not, shall with softer mold beat out the breathing bronze, coax from the marble features to the life, plead cases with greater eloquence, and with a pointer trace heaven's motions, and predict the risings of the stars. You, Roman, be sure to rule the world. Be these your arts, to establish law with peace, to spare the vanquished, and to crush the proud. Very famous text. Some Jewish sources echo this Roman discourse, whose validity is not rejected outright. In the Legatio ad Gaium, for instance, Philo praises the peace that prevailed during Augustus' principate. And he writes, "This is he who not only loosed but broke the chains which had shackled and pressed so hard on the habitable world. This is he who exterminated wars both of the open kind and the covert which are brought about by the raids of brigands. This is he who cleared the sea of pirate ships and filled it with merchant vessels. This is he who reclaimed every state to liberty, who led disorder into order, and brought gentle manners and harmony to all unsociable and brutish nations," and so on and so forth, and making it shorter for sake of time. Now, this passage has a clear rhetorical dimension. Insofar as Augustus is described as a good emperor who contrasts with Caligula, the bad emperor who did not respect the rights of the Jews. Moreover, in this specific passage, Philo aims to discredit the Alexandrians by showing that they did not honor Augustus the way they wanted to honor Caligula, in spite of the former's superiority over the latter. So Philo's assessment of Roman imperial power is complex. I've written about it elsewhere. And his praise of Augustus should not be taken entirely at face value. All in all, however, the fact remains that Philo reproduces some aspects of Roman imperial ideology and of pro-Roman Greek discourse. Interestingly enough, some late rabbinic texts also echo the discourse about the benefits of the Pax Romana and of the Roman legal order. In Genesis Rabbah, for instance, one reads in connection with Genesis 1:31, "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good, vehine tov meod." Resh Lakish says, "Behold, it was very good, this is the kingdom of heaven. And behold, it was very good, this is the earthly kingdom." How is the earthly kingdom very good? How strange. Only because it exacts justice for the creatures, for human beings. "I made the earth and created man, Adam, Edom, upon it." Resh Lakish seems to interpret the presence of the Vav as meaning in vehine, as meaning that two things were declared very good, the kingdom of heaven and the earthly kingdom. He identifies the latter with Rome on the basis of Isaiah 45:12, which states that God created Adam, a word that may also be vocalized Edom, and thus refer to Rome. If one chooses to read Edom, the verse may be understood as meaning that God created the Roman Empire and established its power over the nations of the earth. According to the Midrash, the only reason that could explain such a paradoxical divine decision is the fact that the Roman Empire exacts justice for the creatures. In other terms, it establishes a proper legal order. This passage is exceptional in rabbinic literature, but it is quite telling. The problem with the Roman definition of Rome's mission was that it displayed similarities with the mission ascribed to Israel in biblical and Jewish tradition, a tradition which states that all the nations are to be blessed in Abraham, and that through Israel, the nations are called to discover God's laws and finally to live in peace with each other, possibly in the Messianic age. The book of Isaiah already describes the eschatological peace resulting from the universal recognition of the God of Israel. And even Philo, who does not indulge much in eschatological reflections, expects Israel and its laws to be universally recognized at the end of days. From a Jewish point of view, the quasi-universal peace advertised by Rome could sound like a claim to be fulfilling the promise that God had made to Israel. In other terms, by promoting a Roman Messianic age, Rome was taking the place of Israel. And since I have not much time left, maybe I'm going to summarize my last part, and just emphasizing that this dimension of replacement of Israel by Rome was even further emphasized by the two traumatic events that happened in the 1st and 2nd century CE, namely the destruction of Jerusalem, and that was followed by the creation of the Fiscus Judaicus, which meant that the money that was supposed to be sent to the Temple of Jerusalem was now sent to Rome, and especially at the beginning, to reconstruct the Temple of Jupiter in Rome. So you had the money that was supposed to be for the Temple of the Lord, that was now used for the temple of Jupiter. And the second replacement event that was really traumatic is the refundation of Jerusalem as a Roman colony called Aelia Capitolina in the 2nd century CE, which here you have something much worse than what happened with the Babylonians in the First Temple period. It's not only that Jerusalem is destroyed, it is replaced by a Roman city filled with Roman temples. And if you add to that, if you follow the scholars who want to place the Jupiter Capitoline temple of Aelia Capitolina on the Temple Mount, it makes it even worse, but not all scholars agree. So I just conclude briefly by saying that both at the level of ideological discourse and in the reality on the ground, Rome threatened the Jews in a particular way and could be perceived as taking Israel's place in the world. Long before the Roman Empire would become Christian, the issue of substitution was already a major issue. This aspect of Israel's encounter with the Roman Empire was clearly perceived by the Jews who chose to identify Rome with Esau. In order to describe what could be seen as a struggle between Israel and Rome for the first place in God's plan, what more appropriate picture could come to mind than Jacob and Esau contending for the same blessing? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Al.
I want to reinforce your point and add one potential additional parallel. Who is the eternal people? One way people in antiquity expressed their idea of eternity is they said, as long as the Roman Empire will last. And therefore you have not only the parallel roles that are competing that you've pointed to, but you also have the parallel role of who is the eternal people. The Jewish people is the eternal people versus Rome is the eternal people, and popularly expressed in the notion that eternity is as long as the Roman Empire will last. So I think you can potentially add that to your list of examples.
Thank you very much, yes. We actually had, with the group of scholars that is around this project on Judaism and the Roman Empire, we actually had a conference in Tel Aviv 2 years ago about the future of the Roman Empire, studying these perceptions of whether the Roman Empire is going to last forever or not, questioning and contesting the eternity of Rome from a Jewish and sometimes at the beginning even from a Christian perspective. So, yeah, but obviously this is a very important point. Thank you.
Michal, and then Shai, and then...
This was wonderful. Thank you very much. Really a beautiful overview of this. I just want to ask a few questions about number 8, which I found astonishing. I just want to understand a few philological points. Why are you reading this Edom and not Adam? Why are you reading this Anochi Asiti Aretz ve'Adom alea, Edom and not ve'Adam alea?
No, she
and
says
men?
I'm saying you can vocalize it differently.
Yes,
so
but if you're reading it as men, it's less about Rome. It's about human.
of course, that's the way it's vocalized in the Masoretic text. It's Adam. But what I mean is that here, the Midrash reads it as Edom.
That's what I'm saying. I think even in the Midrash itself, I'm not sure you have to read it about Rome. It could read it about Adam, right?
Yeah, but then it connects it. It brings the verse to explain it, the affirmation that the Malchut Haaretz, the earthly kingdom, exacts justice for
I understand, but the wisdom is government in general. It doesn't have to be specifically the Roman government. It could be any government. So he gave justice to men, the ability to rule, and it's justice to all. And I think I was very surprised to find that text if it is about Rome. Let me just put it this way, specifically about Rome. But I think it doesn't contradict your point. If it's surprising, it doesn't mean it can't be there. Rabbinic culture is always surprising. But I think, by the way, it can still follow your point by saying it's a government, and who's the government now? The Romans. So it still works.
It could be any, but
exactly.
In this case it's
but I
wrong.
think theologically, I would be hesitant to use Edom, because specifically when they use, I would look, in order to prove this as Edom, I would look at the syntax of using Edom. I think this is an unusual use to use this Edom alias Barati. It doesn't sound to me, the syntax I'm sorry, it's hard to me to explain the grammar in English. We'll talk Hebrew
But the
later.
rabbis don't care a lot about
Midrash,
syntax.
yes.
What?
Rabbis don't care a lot about syntax when they're doing
No, but when they do,
Midrash.
but they do talk a certain way.
It's a very hard
No,
reading
they talk a certain way, right? And it doesn't sound to me.
I can bring you 8,000 examples where they completely override the syntax and don't care.
Just to add, because the fact they're surprised by being very good. And if it was just about government
Right,
being very
exactly.
good, that wouldn't be. And I think
How
that's
can you
surprising
call the kingdom
that this
good? It's
government
wicked.
is
No.
the good one. That's the Edom one.
Again, I said it still works if you talk about the government and you're surprised that it works well, and the government in their time is Rome. I'm just saying I don't see a dome being used here. It's a small theological point. It doesn't negate your bigger point. It's just a very.
I understand it. But thinking about it, it's true that the Roman Empire is generally described as the Malchut Arisha, but sometimes it's also called Malchut. So, well, anyway, it could. You're right. It could be any government, and it could just be a general point about governments are necessary for us not to be in a jungle. It could be a general point. It could also be that it's more specifically. But in any case, it's the Roman context. So, yeah. But thank you. Yeah, that's right.
Shay.
Yeah, just two comments. I appreciate this very much. Just two comments, sort of in the spirit of what Al said, maybe in more support. The example that you gave from Ovid about the universalism of Rome and its similarity with Israel's being a universal people is echoed by Josephus in the fourth book of Antiquities when he paraphrases Balaam's speech. And what is striking there is whereas Balaam says they are a people living alone, right, living apart, Josephus has it, the whole world will be your inhabitation. In other words, the exact opposite, making that point that for Josephus, who's living in Rome already in the first century, Israel is a universal people. And I think so that would support what you're saying.
Wow, that's a very nice point.
more
Thank you so much.
Even more so, he says the promise is a promise of a diaspora.
Right.
It's not the promise of the land. It's a promise of a
Right,
diaspora.
in other words, so that's striking.
He converts it quite explicitly.
They are a people of the world. They are humble. And the other thing is, of course, Cicero. There's a direct parallel to Cicero's. This great, right? This great empire has been created by its power, meaning by God's power. This great empire has been created. Is almost verbatim in the Talmud. Umazum min hashamayim. This nation, but there it's for the opposite reason. It's so wicked, right, that it must have been ordained by God. In other words.
Parallel, I'm sorry, I want to jump in. It's also paralleled in the speech that Herod is supposed to have given when he built the temple. And there he says explicitly that Rome has brought peace to the world, and that Rome has been endowed by some divine grace, and it's because of my connection with Rome, and so on and so forth. But you have this same point being made by Herod, I'm sorry, put in Herod's mouth by Josephus.
That's wonderful. I would be very grateful if you could give me a better reference to Herod's speech I can find, but maybe the passage in the Talmud.
18a.
Thank you so much. This is really helpful. Tremendous.
There's a parallel also in a different section of the Talmud for the same.
Sure.
Yes.
Can you send it to me?
Chaim?
I just wanted to ask about sometimes the confusion between Rome and Athens. Because sometimes when they speak about Rome, they actually mention Athens. And I just remember the 11 needle stories in the Lamentation Rabbah, when there is a meeting between a man from Jerusalem and a man from Athens. And actually, there's no Athens anymore, there's Rome. And it could support your idea of using Rome as an idea, and Athens is the same or is parallel to Rome itself, to the idea of some kind of other, which can be identified or as Rome or as Athens. I think Rick has a comment about it.
Well, from a historical point of view, it's for sure. The rabbis were facing a Greco-Roman culture.
Yeah.
In many aspects, were Greco-Roman rather than stricto sensu Roman. That's for sure. So this makes sense. On the other hand, I think they still differentiated, but it's maybe a question of passages and sources. It's difficult to generalize. But I think they still really identify Rome as something different. And think about the Sifra Declining passage. How interesting it is that there is no Greek. That precisely in the context of the
In a
languages of revelation.
in a Tannaitic text,
But later on,
the Latin here is incredible.
Yeah. So I think still we can say they differentiated, but in some cases they may have considered that it was the same.
Lieberman, in a few places, he offers a Latin source for a word, and in a few cases he recants in later, because in later in his life, Lieberman wrote in a few places, we shouldn't expect Latin words in general in rabbinic literature, says Lieberman, and definitely not in early rabbinic material. And I find it astonishing that you find Latin in this text and not Greek. This is really incredible.
Well, the rabbis say that Latin is only good for making war.
And Torah, apparently.
Chris.
Since we're all throwing these parallels at you, I'll throw a couple more, which I think are parallel, but also have some neat little twists or differences. So one, perhaps obvious one, the Cicero passage, which is saying it's not because we've excelled anyone in population, et cetera, it's just because we're pious and devoted. In Deuteronomy 7, right? God chose you not because you are the most numerous of people, in fact, you're the least of people. It doesn't go on to say anything about versatility in art. But the difference there is, it can't say at that moment, it's because you're pious. Right? It says your forefathers were pious. I made a promise to them. But you have got to prove yourselves yet. But that's got to do with where we are in the historical narrative of Israel and so on. I think the conceit that will come out of the tradition later is that it's because you're devoted to Torah and so God chose you and everything. That particular moment, that can't be asserted yet because of the narrative where they're about to go into the land and lose Moses. And so he's telling them, without me, you're sunk. You've got to do the right thing now. So it's a parallel, but with a significant difference, which I think is narratively, has a narrative logic to it. And then, since we're on Tractate Avodah Zarah, there's also the opening eschatological scene, which I'm going to mention really briefly in my paper this afternoon, just to pass over it very quickly, though. But what happens there is that this eschatological judgment, at the end of time, God sits with the Torah scroll in his lap and says, all those who busied themselves with the law, with Torah, come to me to get your reward, and the first who come in are the Romans. And they say, no, this is 2a. This is 2a. This is the very first story. 18a I'm also going to talk about. And the Romans come in first, and they say, everything we did so that the Jews could occupy themselves with Torah. So you see the rabbinic authors are saying, you're trying to co-opt this claim of ours, that you are somehow bringing about the law. It's not your law that's the law that's important. And now you're trying to get in God's good graces by saying, yeah, it was your law that we're trying to bring about, and so on. And of course, God sort of, throws them out and laughs at them. The Persians come in and make the same claim, but there you have each of these nations is trying to make the claim that they were trying to establish the conditions for the Jews to be able to fulfill the Torah. But it starts with the Romans. So I think, again, it's this battling over this, who has the reputation, or who has the mission of bringing about the law. The rabbis were trying to put the right law into the mouths of the Romans, if you will.
Yes. Just to add on that, and there's a parallel to that in Rashbi. When Rashbi goes to the cave, the conversation in Shabbat, before in Tractate Shabbat, they sit in the study house, and in that connection, and scholars have pointed out that it's taken from Avodah Zarah, and it's put in the mouth of an argument between three rabbis. One says, the Romans are great. Look, they built stone, they built whatever. Right? And Rashbi did for us, right? And this is the life of Brian. But and he's saying, they're so good for us, and they point to the same thing. But Rashbi says, and this is the mouth of Hashem becomes Rashbi in the story. That's the rebel rabbi, and he says, they only did it for them. But I think it's interesting that the conversation is moved from the end of time into the study house. And it's become, I think it brings it closer to a discussion about what makes what we do possible.
And associated with a figure who's persecuted by the Romans.
And so on, right? Shimon bar Yochai is the one who says, no, they did it only for themselves, and he's persecuted and hiding from the Romans. Thank you. This is really so helpful. And the theme of law is really central in the project. It's one third of the project. Absolutely. The challenge of Roman law. I think it's very central. I wonder, even that's something I still need to figure out and write about, but I wonder whether the inclusion of the one and only positive Noachic commandments in the list of the seven.
It's to establish courts.
The fact that it is to establish courts, I wonder whether it's not connected with the Roman context.
Yes.
With the fact that it was something that the Romans so much promoted,
Yeah. And yet it's state disabled. You say that you did that and that made it possible for the Jews to study Torah. Wrong. You still don't get into heaven at the end.
But it means that they have that in mind.
I know. I think they assert it and then they subvert it, I think. Yeah.
Tobias.
Okay, I have another parallel.
We should get some grant
Don't
money.
worry whether, I'm not sure whether it is a helpful parallel. I have a bigger question. So I think one could even read parts of the Gospel of Matthew like this, to say if you have the devil struggling with Jesus, and you have on the one hand the chance what it means to pray to the devil, then you have all the countries of the world by the devil, and this is certainly Rome, and you have the chance that this new kind of Israel, or this certain kind of Israel, has now Jesus, to whom is given the rule also to be the new Pantocrator. I think even this is a point. But my question would be, and you have the look over the bigger project, wouldn't it be also necessary to say, okay, to make the whole argument even a little bit more broader, and to say in how far does Persia in these times also play a role, to say, okay, Persia with its own foundation myth, and which is playing a role in the field, to say it's not just Rome. In a certain sense, if you are part of the Roman Empire, but the later you come, the more and more there is this idea that in 1 year you are part of the Roman Empire, and another year you are part of the Persian Empire, and 20 years later you are. In how far does this play a role? And I think this is also with a country with its own foundation, myth and ideas, how to rule. I'm not sure whether this should be part of the argument, or whether this is impossible at the moment or so. Just for a question.
And the Persians checked the Romans' ambitions, right? Because they could never.
Yeah.
So perhaps for the Jews, the Persians disproved the claim of the Romans to be the world.
Yeah, there is a very nice passage in Phaedo's Ligatio, in which he says, he uses a topos, and he says, the Roman Empire extends from where the sun shines to where the sun ends, and so on. So it's really universal. But at the same time, he says, but should you not think that the Roman Empire is restricted to the oikoumene, the civilized world, which ends with the Rhine and the German tribes on the one hand, and the Parthians on the other. So he really, at the same time, he's really remembering everybody that there are very clear limits to the Roman Empire. So I think definitely this played a role in Roman sources, in some Jewish sources, and they had this perception. Now, ideally, it would be great to be able to also take into account, what happened in the Partially Sassanid Empire.
There's the ideal world.
I must say this is really beyond my capacity. What we tend to do with my team is to focus on rabbinic sources from Eretz Israel, and to compare them with their Babylonian reworking in the Babylonian Talmud. And in general, the orientation is different. Which is very interesting.
Yeah.
The Babylonian context plays a role. Yeah. So we are very cautious about using material from the Babylonian Talmud, because we know that it reflects a different context in a different empire. Yeah. So we make this distinction quite sharply.
Thank you. We have time for maybe one more short question, if anybody has. Okay. Yeah.
Sure.
Sorry, Daniel.
I was wondering, in your paper, it was really interesting in drawing the parallels with the universalism between Rome and the rabbinic conception of Israel and Israel's God. And in your project, are you looking at the, I don't know how you say, distinction between types of universalism, in the sense of that if there's this competition, that if Israel wants to claim that it is associated with the true universal God, rather than the Roman God, the way in which it can't define its universalism in the sense of empire universalism, and it has to say, actually the empire is provincial, and God is over the whole world, not just the civilized world. So it's a different. You look at the way in which the rabbinic text claim a different type of universalism.
That you can see very clearly, for instance, in text that's where you have Titus, for instance, a Roman emperor. Challenging the God of Israel. For instance, the story that Titus enters into the temple and then nothing happens, so he comes back to Rome and he says, and there is a tempest on the sea, and then he says, what is this God? I mean, this Jerusalem God who was unable to prevent me from entering into his temple when I was there in Jerusalem, and he attacks me only on the sea. So he's a sea god. He's a god limited to the sea. And then of course the rabbinic sources make it clear that it's the reverse. The power of the emperor is limited. It's not over all the earth, whereas the power of God is both earth, sea, space, whatever, everywhere. So yeah, you have this kind of discussion going on.
And then they take a story from Greek mythology and put it in about Titus, because they take the story of the
Mosquito?
the mosquito that enters Titus' head, which is actually a story from Greek mythology.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.